Hello and welcome to American Friction, your favourite and the world's best American politics podcast. I'm Jacob Jarvis.
And I'm Chris Jones. The flooding in Texas has claimed the lives of over 100 people, many of which were children. There's no other word for it. It's a catastrophe, and one that some say could have been avoided. Trump has made a staggering amount of cuts to federal spending since the start of his second term.
He has, and that includes huge cuts in spending to things like weather forecasting at a time where climate change is amounting to a huge increase in the number of dangerous weather events. And with hurricane season underway in America, how urgently does the US need to change course to avoid even more disasters like what we've seen in Texas? Dr. Shweta Chakrabarti is a behavioral scientist and CEO of North America for We Don't Have Time, the world's largest climate content and solutions broadcaster. And she joins us now on American Friction. Shweta, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us on the podcast. I just want to start off with some context, I guess, in Texas and what we've seen from the shocking scenes of the flooding. Some reports suggest that there's been as much as a foot of rain in some places. Just how bad has this weather event been?
We're talking about several feet of rain that happened in an extremely short amount of time. The forecast predicted rain was coming, inches of rain were coming, and it's a renowned area for flash flooding. So this isn't something that necessarily is unfamiliar, and that's actually a critical piece of this too, right? That the community is well aware that flash flooding can occur in this central part of Texas. So when a risk is familiar, you're also less likely to be scared about it and to really take some of the precautions because it's something that's known, it's something that's been experienced. So sure, there were some warnings, and sure, it was on perhaps some of the community members' top of mind as they went to sleep, but ultimately it was way worse than what was predicted. It happened in the middle of the night, which is, at the risk of sounding like a cliche, it was the perfect storm. It was something that was familiar, so residents weren't as nervous. It was way worse than what was predicted, and it happened in the middle of the night, and it was during a holiday weekend. So when floodwaters rose as fast as it did, we saw the devastation the next day and through the whole weekend. It was unbelievable to witness exactly how bad it was.
Yeah, I think it's known as something like the flash flood corridor, isn't it? And you touched on it there, and I remember reading that this is a 1 in 1,000 year type flooding event that we've seen. So this is something that is just basically completely unprecedented, especially in modern times. But you've touched on it there a little bit as well in terms of the forecasting and the reportings of the warnings that were given to people, which appeared to be, well, first of all, the forecasting, as you mentioned, didn't capture how bad this was going to be, and the warnings seem to have come way too late. I mean, this is probably an impossible question right now as to where we are, but what seems like the biggest failure that happened right now?
We can actually figure it out at this point. The National Weather Service, there are cuts to the National Weather Service that have been put into effect from the current Trump administration. That has signaled. So let's say the cuts it just got passed, right? So we can't blame the cuts itself, but it's the impending cuts, the perception that the cuts were coming that resulted in so many vacancies already occurring around the United States. So there was, without the cuts actually even going into effect, people were already leaving their jobs. And so we saw that nearly half of National Weather Service local offices around the United States have at least 20% vacancy rates. People in key positions in forecasting were taking redundancy packages, or they were retiring early because they knew this was coming. So that it's already had an effect, and it hasn't even gone into effect. And that's the key point. Imagine when it actually goes into effect, right? And what that's going to do. This is the situation right now. And this is a service that was already stretched thin. So it was already experiencing a lack of resources, a lack of personnel. So then with the perception that more funding was going to be cut from the National Weather Service, and then to actually see the cuts go into effect, we are just creating a scenario where what we just saw in Texas and New Mexico, there was flash flooding in New Mexico, some Americans just died. We are seeing even now we know we are going to have even worse outcomes from inevitable climate impact disasters like flash flooding, like flooding from hurricanes, like droughts, like wildfires. All of these things are what the National Weather Service was responsible for creating preparedness around. And it's just going to be even worse than what we saw. One more thing that we can say is that the reason this happened was because the local National Weather Service offices were not communicating what was received from the federal National Weather Service.
Okay.
So the federal National Weather Service tracked what was coming in Central Texas, and the local weather service did not put the communications out in time. And that's because there are two key positions that were vacant, right? The permanent science officer role in that local weather service office was vacant, as well as the warning coordination meteorologist. That's not to say those roles weren't being filled. There were still other personnel that were doing those roles. But now, what do you expect when you're stretching individuals so thin? They have to make a choice between actually gathering information that's going to result in preparedness for future dangers, and then also warning communities about immediate dangers. When you are stretching those personnel across different roles, you are bound to end up having some sort of gap in communication. That's what we saw, a lack of local communication. And one more point, sorry, I hate when people go on and on and on, and I know I'm doing it, but this is what drives me the most nuts about it all. It is the current political rhetoric where the Trump administration is saying that Texas, thank you for being a Trump state, you need to be sending your resources as a state to the real risk that your state faces, which is illegal immigration. We need to be sending Texas's resources to border control and border patrol. And that is ultimately what caused this. There's already limited resources. The political rhetoric to send those limited resources to fictional risk around illegal immigration versus actually preparing communities for what is going to kill them, like flash flooding, that is ultimately what caused these Texas floods to be as bad as they were.
Is there a concern here that Trump could use the failures we've seen here almost to his advantage? Because clearly he wants to go at these agencies and put these agencies under extra scrutiny, cut staff. And could he potentially say, well, look, this has failed, so this is more reason for me to want to get rid of people and hope, I don't know, the commercial sector will fill in and that's a way of saving money? Could this help that narrative? And is there also a concern that whilst these agencies are continuing to work, that because they're under that much scrutiny too, they might be worried about making false calls, and that might also make them not sort of flag warnings in quite as an alarming way as they perhaps should?
Well, I think the latter is possible. I'm not seeing evidence for that at the moment, but sure. I mean, in terms of just human psychology, we could see that. It's been so much scrutiny on these agencies, which provide such critical services to Americans to protect their health and security, and they're being really scrutinized and torn apart. And really good, smart people that are serving as civil servants are feeling extremely just attacked and not appreciated. And that's going to have a psychological effect and ultimately might result in, and this is the psychologist in me saying this, but that's something that we don't necessarily have clear evidence for, but I wouldn't be surprised. It's a fair hypothesis to put forward. I think Trump is doubling down on this disaster as a reason to not have proper funding for climate disaster preparedness, right? So, I mean, the whole Trump machine, the MAGA machine, the conservatives more broadly are saying that these Texas floods are because of inadequate agencies to help protect America, like NOAA and like the National Weather Service. So they're saying exactly what you just suggested in the first point you made, which is, look, we should be defunding the National Weather Service and NOAA because they're not doing their job. When this is the time to put more support and resources into preparedness and communication. The science ultimately is so clear that more climate-related events are going to occur in frequency and in intensity. This is not the time to pull resources away. It's the time to infuse the agencies that work in this space to do their job and to do it better. Because it's true, forecasting is an inexact science, right? We can only do as much as we can with the science on hand. So let's improve the science. Let's double down on the science. But the current federal government is saying, let's double down on getting rid of these agencies because, look, they allowed this to happen, so they don't work.
You wrote a piece where you wrote about the risks of commercialization within this sort of sector. Is it going to become the case that weather forecasts are a luxury for the minority that can afford them, and particularly in rural areas where many, I'm sure, of Trump supporters live, could be that's going to be even more of a concern? Because I suppose if you live in a metropolitan area, it's more likely that there's enough people to be paying to make sure you all get the accurate forecast and that can spread out. But if you live in a tiny remote area where there's only a few hundred of you, then why would a commercial sector really bother, would be the issue there, I suppose.
I mean, the writing's on the wall. It's so obvious that that's what would come from this. There's a reason that this service is a federal service. It's something that taxpayers, every American taxpayer, pays $4 a day. That's it, roughly, for the protections that the National Weather Service and NOAA provide. It's a minor cost for what is received in return. To cut this makes absolutely no sense. It's an opportunity for privatization for Trump's private sector crony friends. That's the only explanation for it. There's no other reason why you would cut a service that is so clearly, it's cost effective and it does so much to protect public health and public security. We also, the cuts, I mean, none of these cuts make sense, right? So it's not like we need, there's no rational explanation for any of it. It really is pure greed. And they're stealing future public security and health. And, another outcome that's linked to all of this is energy bills going up for Americans, right? So not only are we not being protected against climate impacts, we are also going to be paying more for the energy to keep our lights on and to cool us in this extreme heat. We are now having to pay more for that rather than less, even though the technology is there for us to pay less. American energy bills are going to go up $110 by next year, several $100s if this continues by 2030. That's insanity, because there is renewable energy that can be easily integrated into the grid in the United States that lowers Americans' energy bills. And rather, everything Trump is doing is to increase the cost for Americans and to put more money in his pockets and his private sector friends' pockets. That's ultimately what this is. We're just witnessing pure greed at the top of the federal food chain.
You look at Florida, for example, which is a huge voter base for Trump. It's basically, it's where he bases himself in Mar-a-Lago. Florida is one of these cases where these extreme weather events are an ever-increasing risk to the people that live there. There are reports, for example, that Miami could be underwater in a decade's time. There are also, things like Storm Ian. I covered Storm Ian when I worked in the US for a little while, and the devastation there over such a massive area was incredible. I find it really difficult to understand why Donald Trump wouldn't invest from a purely selfish basis in climate science when a lot of his voter base will be impacted by these extreme weather events, and in many cases die. They will die because of these. But my broader question really is what has been the reaction from American citizens to Donald Trump's cuts to things like forecasting and trying to manage the risk of extreme weather events?
The narrative that the MAGA machine is putting out is very palatable for his supporters.
Okay.
They're able to follow the logic of, okay, well, climate change isn't real. This is happening because of something that the liberals did. And they are just following along with the narrative that's been created that is really entrenched in evangelical Christianity. Okay. And we have to remember that is a large part of the American voting base and a large supporting faction for all things Trump agenda, right? And it's not just around climate. It's around abortion. It's around what liberals and Democrats have thought were pretty much solved and resolved and we've progressed on, we are going backwards because of this real Christian evangelical narrative that is pervasive now in the MAGA party. What the liberals and Democrats have not done is create a secular narrative that's really attractive to the American public, right? What is our worldview that can bring some of those moderates in the conservative space back over to the liberal side of things? We need that story that is really science forward, that is entrenched in data and evidence and facts, that is able to bring some of this public back to us, some of this voting public. That's where, we failed miserably in the most recent Kamala Harris election effort. And we learned this the hard way, that that's actually what's going on. And so if you believe that Trump is a byproduct of we're talking about a conservative campaign that started decades ago, that's permeated education and media.
Yeah.
There is a university, Prager University. I urge you and your listeners to just do a Google search on this if you haven't heard of it. It is unbelievable. It's a for-profit enterprise that is creating school materials that 1 in 3 public school students in the United States are getting access to and seeing. And it is rewriting American history. It's talking about slavery as an economic boom in American history. And it's talking about climate change as natural acts of God.
Yeah.
When you have conservative ideology infiltrating public education and media, Trump is a byproduct of all of that. And so this was inevitable, and you've created a public that believes in him as the course of what is described to come from this Christian evangelical narrative, right? So this is deep. This is really, it's intense, it's deep. It's been decades and $1 billion. We tracked the money. The Yale School of Communications in the United States actually was able to look at the money and where it was spent and from where it was spent. The conservatives really collaborated. They don't all know each other and get along necessarily, but they collaborated on creating this narrative. And that's why we have Trump as president now. So in terms of how do they justify it? So just your first point, right? How do they say, well, Mar-a-Lago is going to go underwater? There's this, as a behavioral scientist, it's the it won't happen to me attitude. It's optimism bias. It's going to happen to everyone else and not me. And everybody is guilty of that, including, communities that have experienced disasters firsthand or are adjacent to disasters may lose that optimism bias somewhat, but pretty much everyone else, which is still the majority of America, still has that optimism bias. And also when you're that rich, you think that you can protect yourself with money. So that's what a lot of the wildfire areas in California were looking to do to protect their homes through private firefighting. There's this expectation that you can protect your home from flooding. But it's extremely naive, because your home may survive, but what about, how are you going to get mail? How are you going to get federal services, ambulances and fire trucks when you need it? It's completely irrational, but that's what we're dealing with, not irrational thinking and policymaking.
Just before we move on to the challenges that can be made in terms of Trump's agenda when it comes to climate action, kind of what you touched on there in terms of the response to when these extreme weather events do take place and impact large communities, because Trump he's taking on agencies such as FEMA, for example. Why? I don't understand why. Can you tell me why?
So I was the chief behavioral scientist for a $250 million grant from FEMA to help make communities more resilient. Most of that has been already allocated, and good work was done there. We're talking about Hurricane Sandy devastated New York City and New Jersey and surrounding areas back in 2011. And the community, that's the kind of community that FEMA and this CERC project grant was going to help. How do you make communities that are vulnerable to storm surges from hurricanes, as one example, more resilient, right? So building out resiliency along the East Coast because of storm surges, flooding, heavy precipitation events, building out resiliency around the Great Lakes, around water warming, and honestly, just food security issues that come from that in terms of marine proteins.
Yeah.
And then figuring out how to make areas that are drought prone more resistant to drought. how to make wildfire areas more resistant to wildfire. I mean, these are very practical things that FEMA was doing and supporting. And it was preventative because there's not enough money for relief and recovery. The amount of disasters, $27 billion disasters in the US in 2024 alone. Okay, so there's not enough money to clean up after those. We just can't afford it. So the idea was it's cheaper to do preventative efforts than it is to clean up after the fact, right? $100 million to create storm surge barriers in New York City is much cheaper than the $8 billion after a Hurricane Sandy type of event to clean up New York City. So prevention works, protection works, preparedness works, proactive preparedness. That is what FEMA was moving to for cost savings. That's the whole point, because it was very clearly recognized that we were just spending way too much money on recovering after the fact. Okay, so now Trump doesn't want to pay that either. And his whole point is, let's make this a state issue, and then he can handpick which states to add federal funding support to. And this is the way to really squeeze and create pain in the states that did not vote for him. Washington State, then Governor Jay Inslee, asked Trump to support following devastating wildfires back last November in the United States, asked for support. Trump was like, you're not getting anything from FEMA. Same thing, Governor Newsom in California. He's using this as a tool he's using this basically just to punish those that he feels are not bending the knee to him, ultimately. Yeah. That's the reason for getting rid of FEMA.
This is a really pessimistic question I'm about to ask you here, but it's with what Trump is doing, I think everyone imagines the hope down the line that Trump won't be around forever and maybe someone will come back in and sort of reverse course a little bit. But this kind of reminds me a bit of, we had a conversation a while back with someone talking about US aid and saying that when that was paused, the damage that just a day of that being paused caused there's irreversible damage has already happened, even if someone comes and changes course on that. Is that one of the things that we have to really focus on here, is that the damage that Trump is doing can't be reversed necessarily? I mean, obviously, once an extreme weather event happens and the people who've died and the tragedies there, that obviously can't be reversed. But I mean, generally, the trajectory he's setting America on and the world on with this withdrawal from caring about climate change. If someone else does come into power and wants to change things, they can kind of slow down the trajectory, but they can't necessarily turn it back, can they?
Yeah, I mean, you're honing in on my biggest fears.
I'm sorry. I knew it was a cruel question to ask, but I thought, it was the elephant in the room a little bit.
I mean, it is, right? And there's very personal decisions that people are making all over the United States, around the world, because of this. Yeah. Should we have children or not? That's an output of this. And we're at a point where wealthy countries are having less and less children, and we're actually going to find ourselves in a population crisis. For a long time, I thought overpopulation was going to be our biggest problem come mid-century, but ultimately, the way things are going, it looks like it's actually we're gonna see population decrease and not have the numbers for stable populations in the United States. And that's not where the trajectory was just even a few years ago. So that's showcasing that there's real anxiety around the trajectory that the United States and the world is on. We are seeing that with what happened in the Biden administration with the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the largest ever investment in transitioning to clean energy, we were likely going to still be emitting carbon by 2030, but it was going to be drastically reduced. And we were on track. We would still have to accelerate our contributions that were decided in the Paris Accords back in 2016.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we were moving in the right direction. Now, with the reversal of the Inflation Reduction Act, now with Trump's big, ugly bill that just went through Congress, we are 10 to 30 times more likely to increase carbon emissions in that same time frame. That is like an actual number on how much we have just reversed course and the future trajectory of carbon emissions from the United States. How do we, if we turn power back to the Democrats in the midterms and in the next election, how do we go from 10 to 30 times more likely back to where we were, the trajectory we were on during the Biden administration's policy efforts? It's going to be really hard.
Yeah.
It's not doable, but we've just made it so much harder, right? It's still totally possible to do this. And that's what keeps me going. That's why I'm having this conversation with you all. That's why I do the work that I'm doing. That's why I'm very seriously thinking about having the one child that I don't have yet. It's because I know it can still be done. We know from the climate community, it's nice to work for a media company in climate that tells positive climate solutions and stories. That's what I do every day, all day. And what we have already available and what's in the pipeline, all it needs to do is be scaled. This is more of a policy and a behavioral challenge than anything else. So it's not that we're not going to solve climate. It's the fact that we're not going to reduce as much suffering as we could have otherwise. And that's what's really sad about this whole thing. At some point, the decision will be made that we need to throw everything we have at the climate crisis. I just wish we did it faster and in a way that was really collaborative with the rest of the world. That's where Trump really screwed us. But it doesn't mean we're not going to be able to come back from this and not do it. It just means that there was more suffering than there needed to be.
On that more positive note, where is really good work happening around this at the moment? And for people listening to this who I think we can all end up feeling a little bit hopeless, and you think, well, what can I do really? Maybe recycle a little bit more, and I don't know, try and avoid using my car. You feel kind of quite powerless. But are there groups and things going on that maybe people could look to support, which might help stem what Trump is doing and what's happening across the world, where the trajectory seems to be going, using fossil fuels and not caring so much about the environment as they perhaps should?
Yeah, it's communication. It really comes down to building a groundswell of public support for all of the policies that need to get pushed through various governments around the world still. COP30 is coming up in Brazil. The United Nations is hosting its 30th meeting for climate change. And the public just needs to start engaging. It's really easy to do. We've made it totally free. We have a social media platform called We Don't Have Time. Log in, create a profile, totally free. There's so many ways to get involved and connected across so many different aspects of climate that you may find more interesting, right? So how do you get involved in fashion? How do you get involved in agriculture? How do you get involved in transportation? Sure, we need to make little changes every day, but that's primarily just for increasing awareness around environmental stewardship. We need to value our relationship with the planet the same way we value our relationships with other humans. And we can be cynical about how humans treat each other. But when we have children and we raise children, we say, here's the golden rule. Do unto others as you want done unto yourself. Similarly, we need to create that with the planet. Treat the planet well. Treat it sustainably. Think about your impact on the environment. That's just a value that needs to be created in humans around the world. And that's the whole point of doing those little things, recycling, using your car less, to create that value of environmental stewardship as we develop a future that is dependent on energy, renewable energy, and not on dirty energy, right? So do those behaviors, create the environmental stewardship in you, in your community, in your family, and then go onto the We Don't Have Time app, identify where you can really lend your voice and your volunteer efforts to campaigns that are really active across these different sectors. And maybe just the big picture of getting rid of fossil fuels altogether. You can contribute your name as a signature as it goes into this major United Nations event at the end of this year in Brazil, right? There's no reason to say, I feel hopeless. Add one person to your efforts, you're a team. Add 3 people, you're in a group. Join a global campaign. You're literally creating a groundswell of support that we need to be able to pass some of these global policies ahead at the multilateral level all the way down to the local level. So yes, the United States is letting us down. It's really let me down. I was really hoping to be in the Kamala Harris administration right now. This couldn't be further from that, right? In terms of where we would have been and should have been. That doesn't mean we're not going to turn it around in the US, and it doesn't mean that we can accelerate our efforts when it's time to lead with science again.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on our podcast, but you also have one of your own, don't you? Tell us what it's called and what's it about.
So yes, please tune in to the Scientista podcast. It's all about showcasing women who are leading with science and some allies too. For example, we have Bill Nye the Science Guy as an episode dropping soon. So please check that out.
Jette, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of American Friction. Remember, if you want more from us and want us to keep having conversations like this one, there's a simple way that you can help us, and that is backing us on Patreon. For as little as £3 a month, you'll get the show ad-free and access to bonus content and merch. Simply go to patreon.com/American Friction or follow the link in the show notes to find out more. He's Chris Jones.
I am.
I'm Jacob Jarvis, and this is American Friction. Thank you very much for listening.
See ya.